Marketing and Communications Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. Next slide, please. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. Next slide, please. We serve a very broad client base. Next slide, please. Spanning all industries. Today we are thrilled to introduce Dana Willis, a freelance content strategist in Charlottesville, Virginia, who has over a decade of experience in scholarly publishing and XML content management. Dana has worked on a wide range of projects from digital humanities archives, open source text analysis toolsets, and migrations and content analysis for STM publishers. To learn more about her work, please visit http://danawillis.com. Without further ado, welcome Dana.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks to DCL, and thank you all for joining me today to talk about data-driven user experience. An application's data and content are the common language of the entire team across design, development, content, and management. Understand this, and you'll produce better applications with less waste in the process. Whenever I'm about to begin a conversation about topics as wide-ranging as content strategy and user experience, much less the both of them together, I find it important to provide a sense of where I am coming from and my own perspective on each. Even though I will be touching on many aspects of the work that they do, I want to be clear that I am neither a software developer or a visual designer. Instead, my role is usually to serve as a bridge between those two realms of expertise. I have had the opportunity to be a part of ambitious and successful projects with talented designers and developers, and I have witnessed the ways in which conventional systems can fail them. My goal in this talk is to highlight the space where UX and content work overlap, and offer some valuable questions all of you can ask of your project, no matter your role, from its designs to its data. These questions just might help you preempt roadblocks late in the arc of your project. There are two active definitions of content strategy in the tech world, so I should also clarify that my work is centered on the stewardship, management, and enhancement of large repositories of digitized materials. I usually work with institutions engaged in scholarly publishing and academic endeavors in order to help them understand what they have and how to create new products and projects from their current holdings. From taxonomy generation and metadata creation to migration services, I often spend a lot of my time looking at the XML or the database that supports a given site. I support content creators, offering my clients internal workflows and recommendations for existing and future projects. I have also created wireframes, and those are simplified black and white mock-ups that precede the official design mock-ups. I've provided those for certain projects because in some cases a visual representation of the requirements is far more useful to the team and to the client than yet another textual document. I'll expand on this more as we proceed. And one last note on terminology before I dive in. I will be using the word application to refer to the system as well as the interface, which is usually a website. I am aware that there are instances when these can be entirely separate entities, but in general, most projects I have worked on end up being accessed through a browser window, and from the user's point of view, the two are one and the same. I'd like to start by introducing the two components of this talk, content and user experience. Because it generally comes first in the life cycle of a project, I'll start with content, which is the foundation upon which a site is built. Whether you are migrating content from one platform to another or creating a new application, you have a repository of materials that need to be understood, organized, and imported into a system. Unless the site is very narrowly focused, content-rich organizations are usually dealing with a large and varied corpus. So, as they say, the devil is in the details. Even journal publishers who work within a mostly constrained format that has changed little over the last 200 years must deal with the quirks and idiosyncrasies in their datasets. There are formatting options and display attributes that were easily managed in the print world, but inevitably cause headaches for digitization professionals. And knowing just what you have is a challenge many organizations face. It is often difficult to get a comprehensive understanding of the scope of your archive, not just in terms of the number of items, be it in the hundreds, the thousands, or even the hundreds of thousands of objects, but the myriad variations in format and structure therein. But with all the challenges it can cause, content is of immense value to the organization. Invest in your content. It is why the user is there using your application. And with the proper content analysis and strategy, you can create a tremendous and sustainable product. Turning our attention now to user experience, we are entering a very wide-ranging and much discussed topic with lots of ways to approach it. Since the large umbrella of user experience covers all manner of aspects of human-computer interaction, it is impossible to cover each facet in any given conversation. However, in comparison to the profile outlined for content and content management work, we can highlight some interesting features. Where the content set is widely varied and resistant to standardization, user experience design is meant to smooth out those variations to give the user a unified experience of the site. Not only must a UX designer consider the requirements and purpose of the site being built, they must also be sensitive to the context in which it will be encountered. The delivery of the same content can and should change depending upon the device being used. Responsive design, usability, accessibility, visual design, the list goes on of the number of topics that fall within the realm of user experience. In this slide, I am offering a rather simplified Venn diagram illustrating where the research analysis for content and user experience overlap, and that space is information architecture. No matter the components of your application, they need to be properly labeled, organized, and modeled for representation, whether in a database, in code, or on a screen. A content audit is a great place to start this process, and these are most successful when both UX and content are part of the conversation. A site map can conceptualize the application and the interrelatedness of its features, and taxonomies are often helpful for organizing data, not just for display, but for faceted searching when applicable. To look at this in a more concrete way, let's consider the beginning of a project from both a content analyst and a user experience designer's point of view. If we imagine a new project kickoff meeting, here are some of the questions a content analyst might ask. What do we have? What needs to be retrieved for display, for search, for analytics? What are the logical structures of this data? And how can we define the categories or genres of information to be conveyed, and the technical requirements for each? Across the table, the user experience designer will want to know, what is the purpose or message of this site? What are the client's goals for its creation, or in some cases for its redesign? What are the main navigation features? And what page templates, which are frequently based on content type, need to be drafted? Keep in mind that this is a broad generalization of that conversation, but perhaps much of this will resonate with many of you. If you look closely at these questions, you'll see that there are similar principles underlying many of them. Whether you look at a site from the back end, that is content and system structure, or the front end for display and interaction, a common understanding of the logical structures and categories of information to be offered is essential for a project's success. Some of the most rewarding collaborations of my career so far have involved getting content experts and designers in a room together early in the project to compare notes on any assumptions each team is making and ensuring a shared understanding of the platform that's needed to support an innovative and user-friendly design. The last thing a project manager wants is for a senior designer to resort to trawling through XML in order to validate her design ideas. And it's not the best use of a senior developer's time to be invited to every design meeting. However, it is crucial that someone on the team be monitoring the progress from both perspectives and representing the point of view of both as the project matures. This seems like a good point to pause and consider how this might work in practice on a team. In software, the definition of team is pretty loose. It could be as large as 15 people or more, or as small as 2 or 3. A team in a large organization that develops according to agile software development principles would likely have a product owner or someone representing the client's vision, whether that client is external or internal to the company, a project manager who deals with the management of the team itself, a business analyst who serves as the researcher and documentarian for the team, perhaps a content expert whose sole focus is on the nature of the data set itself. We have developers to build the application, a designer to consider the visual design as well as the user experience design, and a user interface developer or a UI dev who works with the nitty-gritty of implementing the designs in HTML using CSS and JavaScript and other front-end technologies. However, not every organization, and very few of them in fact, can support such an extensive team. The smallest group I have worked with constituted a product owner who was also the lead engineer and developer, a second developer who excelled at analysis, and a designer who mocked up and implemented the site's front end. Many of you likely come from teams that fall along this spectrum. My intent is not to say that you will always need a dedicated team member to foster data-driven design. Whether your formal title is business analyst, content analyst, designer, or developer, setting information architecture as a priority for the team and driving development based on those agreed-upon principles will create an atmosphere where the right questions are being asked each step of the way. That being said, I also want to point out the extreme amount of heavy lifting done by user experience design. Often I see job ads posted looking for one person who can do it all. Mockups and wireframe creation, which is essentially what requirements visualization, design, branding, aesthetics, look and feel, and also front-end implementation, so UI development. There are certainly skilled, talented people out there who excel at all of these activities, but in any organization that has more than one project ongoing, that one person will be asked to do some considerable and often detrimental amount of context shifting from day to day. The first activity, that is requirements gathering and visualizing those requirements, is an engrossing activity and usually involves meetings and in-person conversations. The second, branding, logo creation, and visual design, those are all another kind of endeavor, each of which deserve a special focused attention. The third, UI encoding, is coming to be seen as a separate discipline altogether because it represents yet another mental activity and requires even more dedicated heads-down time. If we imagine a user experience designer responsible for all the tasks I just listed, then he or she will be essential for every phase of the project's lifecycle. And if there are multiple projects ongoing, people will be clamoring for that person's valuable time. I believe that there is a way to make sure that designs are rooted in the realities of data while lifting some of the burdens from a user experience designer's responsibilities. And this is to have an interaction designer or an appropriately skilled team member contributing. Determining the product requirements and visualizing how they will drive an application's behavior from the point of view of the user does not necessarily require a specialization in design work. A sensitivity to good design is essential, yes, but figuring out what buttons to put on a page and where the text will come from is also a deeply analytical endeavor and can be done by someone also well-versed in the content needs of the project. Once the site architecture has been set, the interaction designer begins the work of testing its efficacy. If the client says a certain element needs to appear on the page, but there is no place in the database to access it, this person can raise the red flag before development has even begun. Wireframes are a deliverable that I highly recommend including for every project or prototype. They are ideal ways to communicate the concept of what needs to be there without prompting inquiries about what color it will be or whether its style is appropriate. A good designer can take what appears to be a boring wireframe and turn it into a visually appealing, enjoyable site to use. And even if shape or placement of certain features may change from wireframe to finished design, the designer can begin work already confident that all the required components have been researched and accounted for. So the next two slides I'll show you illustrate the difference between a wireframe and a completed design. Several years ago, I was part of a small team that developed an application called JuxtaCommons. It allows the user to upload several versions of a given text in various file formats and track the differences between each version. So for example, if you have a poem, and this is the original use case, you would be able to upload the first edition, the third edition, the fifth edition, and see how it may have changed across its publication history. Although a desktop version of this software had already been developed for scholars of literature and textual history, our team's objective was to make the application more accessible to a wider public while staying true to its academic roots. Redesigning the interface for the web was one of the most challenging design puzzles I have encountered. We had to adapt a very arcane system of collecting versions, or witnesses, as a scholar might say, and grouping them into comparison sets for analysis by a wider audience. This tool needed to feel intuitive to non-scholarly users and foreground the texts while guiding users through a complicated workflow. This wireframe you're looking at now is the last in a series and the closest approximation of what the application eventually became. This is one of the best reasons to start with wireframes. If our team hadn't worked out all the required components and general structure first, the process would have resulted in significantly more false starts. As you can see, the design for the application continued to evolve and has evolved since, and preliminary arrangements in the wireframes were altered as we continued to iterate through development and user testing. But the backbone of the interface and its constituent parts were already there to be agreed upon. I'd like to transition now to an example of how a project can go wrong without attention to information architecture and the realities of the content set. Let's imagine you've been pulled in on a new project with a publisher. This project encompasses 100 books, and each book needs to be browsable by its own table of contents, which I'll refer to as a shorthand as TOC going forward. To begin, the content analyst receives the books encoded in XML from the client and investigates the markup. It turns out that the books are encoded in bits, and that's an acronym which stands for the Book Interchange Tag Suite, which is a superset of the widely accepted JAT standard for journals, if you're interested. So this tag suite, bits, accommodates all manner of descriptors for TOCs, so the content analyst takes a quick survey to see if the publisher is using those elements as expected. It appears that they are, so they give the designers the green light to mock up a TOC page. Keep in mind that 100 books is too many to get individual attention, so bulk queries are used to generate documentation during the content audit. Without knowing precisely what to look for, everything in the corpus gets a quick summary. This slide shows a quick mock-up of what the designer expects the TOC to look like. We see a book cover, a title, author and contributor information, some publication information, and then chapter titles, which serve as links. All of these are set within the general template of the site. And it seems pretty straightforward, right? Your development team starts implementing according to this mock-up, and it's entirely possible that no one on the content team sees this artifact from the design team. They have moved on to importing or transforming that content into your system. Developers are assuming the data will be there in the system, and so far no one has any reason to believe it won't. This is where a lot of trouble begins. The output of the content team is usually very technical and not often distributed widely. Because their work is considered back-end, they are not always brought in to discuss the ramifications of certain design choices. Of course, most of us believe in good documentation, but in my experience, it is magical thinking to assume that everyone on the team has access to or the right perspective on the documentation that is created. The developers have begun to build out the TOC pages, and proofing has uncovered some questions about the books. About 20% of them also have subtitles, but our team didn't plan to display them, so we didn't import that XML element into the database. Some of them are divided into parts and chapters, but there is no place to display the part information. Others have front matter, prefaces, introductions, dedications. Where do those go? On top of all that, during a sprint review demo, the client has requested that you display the authors for different chapters when that data is there. Where do we put that on the page? Do we need to re-import the data? All of these and more might come up during the development and user acceptance testing phase of your project. Now granted, this is an extreme example, and very, very rarely would all of these issues arise, but I hope it illustrates to you all the ways in which pressure can escalate if content and design are not in close communication. For this particular example, I would recommend that someone on the team be responsible for annotating the wireframes and investigating each element in the XML being called for display. This validates that content is indeed where it was expected, and it uncovers any unusual aberrations, say a book with 10 contributors, which would require way more page real estate than any other book with just 1 or 2. In addition, by narrowing the elements that are being queried in the content set early on, it allows the content experts to do a deeper dive and produce more useful reports overall. Simply querying the XPath of all the book part elements for each book, that is, locating their exact placement in the XML document, that would have uncovered the parts chapters issues and allowed plenty of time for the team to adjust. Now I'd like to turn to a different example, one which requires more interaction design and analysis than just a static wireframe can produce. So let's say we have another new project, and this is an assessment program for a client who would like the user to be guided through a complicated system of questions and contingencies in order to test their Spanish language proficiency. The workflow is predetermined by the client's educational staff and delivered to you as a set of PDFs that resemble the one on your screen. When the designer and content analyst look at the requirements together, they came up with roughly the same list of items to be tracked. You need main navigation links, including help documentation, an image, question instruction text, such as identify the object in this image, question text, the proper question, and then answer options, and questions about whether it be buttons or free text might come up in this conversation. The content analysts and developers may need to store other kinds of information, such as whether a given answer is correct or incorrect, or whether a point value should be associated with an item. Most of those elements are accounted for in this mockup, which gives us a sense of what the user's experience of the assessment program would be, visually. However, there is a crucial aspect of this program missing from this wireframe: the flow itself. Every connector in those PDFs provided by the client represents a choice that must be mapped in the application itself. Someone on the team needs to examine each and every one of them and deliver documentation to the developers and to the client that will instill confidence that these flows have been correctly interpreted and will be implemented appropriately. This is the perfect job for an interaction designer. This is the work of making requirements manifest. It is an act of visualization, but not necessarily a visual design as we think of it. Based on a deep understanding of the flows themselves, the interaction designer can create dynamic interactive wireframes using a program like Axure or InVision. These wireframes result in a template that helps the engineers understand the complexity of the system before they begin to build it. These wireframes can also be delivered to the client for testing to ensure that the flow has been correctly translated from PDF to page. And finally, they can be used to evaluate the system as it is being built. The quality assurance engineers testing the application don't have to debate whether the flow is incorrect or the application is malfunctioning. When they have an actionable record of the requirements, it's already been approved by the client. In software development, design and content need to be in agreement upon the data model, else there will be churn during implementation, resulting in a more fragile application. Whether your projects are text-based, like the first example I gave, or deeply interactive, like my second example, I am confident that adopting even a couple of these principles will result in a better product and less stressful releases. 1. Conduct a content audit early in the process and revisit it regularly. If you are working with large repositories of data, be sure to create more specific queries of the content set so that it will become clear which features are more prominent. Create a sitemap and make sure both designers and content experts get a chance to review and approve it. The most beautifully designed application will still be frustrating to users if its structure does not match the logical structures of the data underneath. Create wireframes. Although it may feel like a luxury to take time mocking up pages in black and white, you will appreciate the effort when you eliminate possible false starts. Whenever possible, annotate those wireframes. Know your data and don't let the special characters and uneven structures in it surprise you in the proofing phase. Finally, keep the design team and the content team in conversation at regular intervals. This doesn't have to mean holding extra meetings, although face-to-face conversations are often more successful than swapping requirements documentation. But consider having a dedicated team member working in interaction design, someone for whom information architecture is the priority as the project evolves. Any and all of these approaches will help you integrate your content and user experience workflows, no matter the size of your team, and help you construct applications that are sensitive to the realities of your data set, as well as the needs of your user. So thank you. I'll open it up to questions.
Well, thank you, Dana. A very informative webinar indeed. The first question that has come in is, what is the difference between interaction design and user experience design?
Thank you, Adam. So interaction design is actually a kind of subset of user experience design. And it really deals with the behavior between the user and the application being built. So whereas user experience design can cover all manner of things like responsive design and visual design and accessibility, usability and interaction fall within an interaction designer's scope. And they are thinking more closely about ways in which the application needs to adapt to the user and ways in which the user needs to be guided or taught by the application itself for the best results.
Great, thank you. The next question has come in, Dana, is what tools do you recommend for making wireframes?
Oh, that's a great question. So a lot of people just go to Fireworks or Photoshop for static wireframes, but I've had a lot of success using a program called Axure, A-X-U-R-E, because it allows you to build a static wireframe or a set of wireframes that can be interactive.
Great, thank you. And the next question has come in is, my team doesn't have access to a content expert, and I depend upon our clients to provide information about their data. What deliverables can I request to help my design team?
Yes, and in fact, that's a very good question because frequently the content expert on a given project is external to your team, right? It's someone on the client's end who knows the content set better than any of you. I would say that a full content inventory is necessary and should never be skipped. A site map of the previous application would also be useful. I mean, I know that you don't want to recreate the previous application if there was one, but it helps to give you a sense of what the client and what their previous host, what their idea of the structure of the site was. And then you can use that as a start of conversation of how you want to change that. And finally, I often like to ask clients or their content experts for a list of the discrete features or the categories they use to organize their own materials. And this may have never made its way to their site if they already have one, but it's the way they internally organize their data. I find that can be very useful because even if you're not making that manifest on the site that you're building, it gives you insight into what they think the priorities might be.
Excellent. Thank you, Dana. The last question that has come in so far is, what other kinds of data should be considered in a user experience work?
Oh, right. So we have been talking about mostly about the content for the application itself. And so there are other conversations in user experience design around analytics, especially user testing and something called split testing, where you provide different, a focus group different versions of the same thing and then analyze how each are used and take information into account about which is more successful. And that leads into the application that you then develop. That is usually for larger enterprises and for applications that are going to get very, very wide adoption. It's a very useful thing to do. But mostly in my experience with the teams I've worked with, we are dealing with the complexities of a large content set, and that in itself is its own challenge.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dana. And thank you, everyone, for attending. This will conclude today's webinar. You will be able to access the recorded version of today's webinar in the archives section of our website located at www.dclab.com. Also, our next webinar will be next Thursday, September 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, titled Managing Deliverable-Specific Link Anchors, New Suggested Best Practice for Keys, presented by Elliot Kimber of Contracts. Thank you everyone for attending and have a great day.